Here we are. All right. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you join us on this wonderful day. We're here to talk a little bit about some of the trends that Brett and I think we will see more of next year. So we've got a few things to go through. So first and foremost, let's do some introductions. Brett, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Thank you, Kevin. I am Brett Johnson, Chief Criminal Officer of Arcos Labs, former bad guy turned good guy. Kevin.
Thank you, Brett. So I'm Kevin Gosschalk, the CEO and founder of Arcos. And a little bit about Arcos. So we're in the business of stopping bad people making money. So really the key philosophy of the Arcos technology and the work we do for our customers is around making the cost for the adversaries higher than their profit margins, which obviously lead to them going elsewhere. So as part of that, we work with a lot of the largest consumer companies in the world. We're very fortunate to get the opportunity to kind of see the going-ons from an attacker standpoint as well. Brett obviously brings a wealth of expertise in us understanding what's going on underground as well. And we kind of put all that information together to figure out, where are the attacks going? How are the attackers innovating? How should we build new products? How should we mitigate that? So we thought it might be appropriate to kind of talk a little bit through what we're seeing and what we think are going to be some of the growing trends for next year. So that's a little bit about the introduction. So let's just dive in. We don't have too long today.
Okay.
One of the big ones, Brett, we saw in the last, I don't know, it feels like it's pretty recently, the last couple of months, and certainly growing, is around reverse proxy phishing attacks. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how high level that works and how the attackers make money and things from that?
Sure, Kevin. So, one of the interesting things that we're seeing post-pandemic is almost a mass awareness of cyber criminal vendors, those marketplaces, developing tools and services that deliver sophisticated goods to unsophisticated attackers, those 99% of cyber criminals that are out there. And top of the list right now are these reverse proxy attacks. So think of it as it is a phishing scheme. It actually proxies everything from the actual website, sits in the middle of that login with the customer. So the customer goes to log into the website. What happens is evil proxy captures the cookie from that specific session. So if the customer has, say, multi-factor authentication deployed, it captures the token. The attacker doesn't need to know the credentials, doesn't need to bypass multi-factor or anything else because they're actually stealing the token from that session. They come in, take over the account, do whatever they want to do. It's an extremely sophisticated attack that is extremely difficult to see what's going on if you're the defender on that side. And the problem with that is that evil proxy, the way it's built out, it's got a high-level customer service. It's extremely easy to use. It costs anywhere from $150 to $400 on a monthly basis, and it works. I mean, it works really well from the attacker point of view. Not so great from the defender side. We, as you know, Kevin, with Arcos, we're extremely fortunate that our product is able to defeat these types of attacks. The way that evil proxy has to work means that Arcos is in a very good position to defend against those types of attacks as well.
Right. So I guess that's the first trend, which is we expect to see an increase in these phishing kits that bypass OTP.
And the problem is, just to add to that, I mean, it's not just evil proxy. We're seeing that caffeine is delivering those same types of cookie stealing attacks. Genesis Marketplace also delivers those cookies as well. So we're seeing an entire slew of products and services that are geared toward that.
Let's move on to the next one. So social media account takeover around our good old crypto scams. What are your thoughts, Brett?
Yeah, my thoughts is, the blockchain itself tends to be extremely secure. You're not going to hack into the blockchain, but everything that surrounds that blockchain is somewhat questionable. The problem is that while the blockchain itself is extremely trustworthy, that doesn't mean that the trust extends past that specific blockchain. And people tend to trust social media. They tend to trust these things without verifying. As such, attackers come in. It's very easy to take over an account. If you think about something like spear phishing, for example, or this reverse proxy attack that can give you that access to those accounts, spear phishing is 87% successful. The reverse proxy attack, extremely hard to identify. Because of that, an attacker can come in, take over the account, and come up with some sort of scheme to get people to either change wallet addresses, to send tokens over to them, anything else like that. It becomes extremely, extremely successful for the attacker side. We're going to continue to see those types of attacks in the near future. And regardless of whether we're in the middle of crypto winter or not, crypto is still a very profitable sector for the good guys and the bad guys.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So obviously, like, trend number one links into more of trend number two occurring.
Exactly.
So then the next one is probably more e-commerce related, and we're seeing a lot of chatter around this one. I know you've got access to a lot of information on this topic too. Is refund fraud. So yeah, let's talk about that one.
Well, the thing about refund fraud has been going around for several years. It's really redefined the way that cybercrime operates, those beginning dynamics of cybercrime. It used to begin that attackers would start with stealing credit card details, and they would try to steal laptops, cell phones. Most of them would fail miserably, and that kept the numbers of cybercriminals down. Now, because refund fraud is so successful, those criminal numbers have just exploded across the board. Most criminals start with refunding fraud, then learn how to do other types of fraud as they go along. Refunding fraud it hits every single merchant on the planet right now. It's eating them absolutely alive. It takes you have to look at everything across the board, from the policies, procedures at the companies that you're running. You have to look at the devices that are coming in, the IPs, the biometrics. I mean, everything across the board. There are bot-driven attacks that hit refunding as well. It's really one of these things that's, again, extremely hard to stop. Again, extremely successful from the criminal side of things. And it's one of these things that we're absolutely not going to see that slow down at all coming into the new year, with the economy slowing down and things like that as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually another good point. Obviously, with the economy where it's at, is this does drive more crime in general. More people are turning to those kind of things to supplement income, especially, I think, some of the less criminal, perhaps, seeming techniques. So, for example, inventory attacks. So, scalping tickets and these kind of things. That's kind of a crime that people probably don't seem to think is a crime. Like, we see people publicly posting about it that work at big companies, and like on social media, that they more than happily saying, yeah, I scalped all these tickets from Ticketmaster and I just made $90,000. It's like, that's illegal. You're committing fraud.
It's about as bad as you can get. And we've got these different groups now that are very organized, that go out and you've got groups of 50,000. Like, there's a group called Malice that has 50,000 members currently. And these members are all about denying inventory, about coming in and swiping all the inventory, whether it be sneakers, Funko Pops, tickets, like you just mentioned, anything else like that. And a lot of the time it's not illegal per se, but it's kind of this gateway drug to that illegal activity, because it teaches you how to use bots. It teaches you how to use proxies. It gives you these workarounds for websites, how to get these items, what to resell it for. You mentioned the economy, and the problem with that is we have a lot of people that usually would not even think about breaking the law, but because we've got these cybercrime environments that are out there now that are geared toward delivering a very successful criminal service to people and doing it for them a lot of the time, we're going to see more and more people that usually wouldn't break the law that are now tempted to do so.
Yep. So that's, I think, another trend that we would expect, unfortunately, in this current market. One that I've been seeing come up a lot, and I think it's going to be an increasing problem going into the new year as well, is attacks on like workforce authentication flows. So just due to the nature of how people are setting up things like zero trust and these new authentication models, they're exposing what typically were authentication endpoints that were behind VPNs, now exposing them to the internet and requiring, strong auth to log in to them. But what we're seeing, and these are big companies we're talking to about these problems, they're actually exposing their employees to things like reverse proxy phishing attacks. Like, that's now actually a big issue, not on just the consumer side, but now everyone is starting to see that on the workforce login side as well, which potentially has really damaging impacts. We were talking to one company where they shared some of their board members were compromised through a phishing site when they were trying to log in to their the employee accounts. Fortunately, board members typically don't have like admin accounts and things like that.
Right.
but it certainly elevated the conversation very quickly in the company, as you could probably imagine. So I think that's another big trend that I'm expecting next year is people are going to have to start thinking about workforce authentication in similar ways that they protect the consumer authentication, because they're both becoming internet facing. Well, obviously consumers are already internet facing, but their workforce side starting to become internet facing.
Well, I think it boils down to, what do attackers look for? They look for information, access, data, cache. Most of that is driven toward finally cache. So you look for the easiest access. Again, we're good about doing that with Arcos, determining what that easy access is, denying that to the attacker, increasing the cost, making the attacker go elsewhere. At that workforce type of attack, you're looking at, is it easier to gain access than it is the consumer side? And a lot of the time it absolutely is, because those companies are simply facing that consumer side. We need to make sure the consumers are protected, and a lot of the times they're not really as focused on the workforce side, and that means an easy access for criminals to get that information, access, data, or cash finally.
That's right. So I think, as we've seen with the reverse proxy stuff, maybe as we're seeing with some of the solutions like Malice, I think we should just expect to see more of these kind of cybercrime as a service, I guess is maybe the term. But I think we're just going to see more bundling, more SaaS-like offerings in the cybercrime ecosystem. We're seeing some really high quality and very polished software, unfortunately, which dramatically lowers the barrier to entry for criminals. What do you think about that one, Brett? Because I know you're kind of looking at that from the attacker's perspective a bit as well.
Kevin, the thing is we talk about friction a lot on the good guy side. We don't want to cause friction to the customer experience coming into a website. Friction is also on the bad guy side. Criminals, you mentioned it before, cybercrime as a service. What that actually boils down to is making sure that anyone who uses that service doesn't encounter a lot of friction, that it's a very easy user experience on the criminal side of things. So that's what Evil Proxy is. That's what Malice is. That's what Caffeine, Genesis Marketplace, all these different cybercrime as a service sites are doing, is they're making sure that the friction for the criminals is very low to non-existent, almost like on the good guy side of things. And we're going to continue to see that. These very highly developed websites, products, and services that are geared toward developing these sophisticated types of tools to unsophisticated attackers, training them how to do that, providing excellent customer service, everything else across the board. Because of that, I expect that these cyber criminal numbers are going to continue to explode over not just next year, but the next few years.
And just to give the audience some context, a product like Evil Proxy has live support. When you open and install the product, it has video walkthroughs every step of the way. It's all in plain English. It's just a very well written UI, unfortunately. And the product does all the hard work for you. You don't need to figure out the nuances of how to do anything. Like when it collects stolen credentials for you, it gives you what you need to literally just copy paste them to make it work. It does all the code for you. It tells you everything you need to know in a very clean user interface. And that's what we're seeing with these other tools. You can imagine having to write a bot that like sculpts a shoe inventory website to kind of buy that inventory. If you're writing that from scratch, you got to contend with what are the APIs you got to connect to. You got to contend with the user interface challenges. You got to make the bot understand I request this URL and I do this next step. You've also then got to contend with that company's bot mitigation technology they may have in place. These kits that you get access to do all that for you, and they're continuously maintained to keep ahead of the website's defenses and any changes. And all you pay is a small clip of likely what you're actually going to profit when you make the attack. So it's kind of a no-brainer, unfortunately, for the attackers. So it really does dramatically lower the barrier to entry. And it also raises the profit margin for the software developers making these tools, because the easier it is to use, the more people use it, the more money they make, rinse and repeat. So it's quite a troubling trend to see, I think, what are very talented people going and building this software for the intent of cybercrime, even if they're not the ones attacking the website directly. They're obviously providing the tools to do so, and also giving guidance on how do they sell that inventory after the fact as well.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty much a nightmare for the good guys. It really is. But again, we've got, and I don't I don't like to toot our own horn, but at Arcos, we provide a service that defeats a lot of the stuff that's going on out there right now, and we're very good about doing that.
We're almost at time, but one other thing I wanted to touch on, and again, you kind of look across the industry, there's a lot of cost reduction being made in general. Like we all see the public markets, we all see the forecast for next year, all these kind of things, the headcount reductions, etc. That does obviously pose a difficult question for how do I protect my company if my headcount's been reduced or my spend has been reduced. So these are, I think that's going to be a huge point of contention next year for a lot of the security teams trying to mitigate these attacks. It's really going to have to come down to justifying the return on investment for building something, for hiring people, for bringing in a third-party solution. I think that's going to be more important now than ever. Like I would really recommend thinking through, if you're trying to solve a problem, it needs to be through the lens of not I'm reducing attacks. It needs to be through the lens of what's the business cost to my company if I can stop those attacks. Like what is the dollars that I'm stopping being impacted elsewhere? That really needs to it's just simply going to have to become a core part of the vocabulary when you're kind of pitching and discussing internally, like how do I think about getting resources to help stop some of these problems? So I think that's obviously going to be a major trend we're going to see next year, just given the economic wind that we're going up against. So
I would agree.
All right. So, well, that's kind of our whirlwind tour on our predictions for next year. I think pretty big ones in there. We're starting to see all of that come to fruition. So reverse proxy phishing attacks, social media ATO focused on crypto scams, refund fraud, inventory denial, or e-commerce attacks around getting access to sneakers and tickets and things like that. Going to continue to trend up. Workforce attacks, just due to the openness now of how that flow is becoming. Cybercrime as a service, and of course, the cost economic considerations when you're thinking about solving all of these problems that we were talking about.
Right.
So we're doing a bigger deep dive webinar Thursday, December 15th. So join us for that. We'll go through and we'll actually show these tools and techniques in action, most likely as part of that session as well. And any last words for you, Brett?
What I would say is have a happy holiday.
Yes.
Trust but verify. Stay safe, stay secure, and stay vigilant out there. Remember that predators are not just in our physical world, that they're also online. Realize that. Increase your situational awareness, especially during this holiday season.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining on.